Today we're going to try and see if we can uncover some of the needs to have and the things that are nice to have when talking about long range shooting. To do this, we have today a very special guest in our studio. Don't tell him that he's special. His ego is big enough as it is. It's actually so big that if he could, he would duplicate himself. So don't tell him. So without further ado, let's get into it. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the channel.
Thank you.
And please introduce yourself. Well, my name is Agil Steele, and I shoot long range. So it's a pleasure to have you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. What we're going to talk about today, and what we were planning to do, was to talk a little bit about how to get into extreme long range and the gear you need to shoot extreme long range. And as I understand, you know a little bit about this subject. Well, I've dabbed a little bit in different gear and tried some different stuff out, see what worked and what doesn't work, and kind of, yeah, I've been around. Good. So one of the main things and one of the most important things you need to shoot long range, what would that be? Well, you need a rifle. Well, that kind's a given. Well, you also need a scope. So, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and other than that, you need to make sure that you have the right rifle and the right caliber for the shooting that you're going to be doing. That's also one of my main things. And that's one of the things that we want to dive into on this or in this video is the difference between need to have and nice to have. So, as you just said, the rifle, the scope, are necessaries. And as I also stated, the caliber is also very important to make sure that you choose your right caliber for your right distance. If you're going to be shooting far or really long range, you want a caliber that can do that, like the 375. If you're not going to be shooting more than about a mile, the 338 Lapua can do that just fine. But make sure to find the right caliber for what you're shooting. So caliber is also really important to think about when talking about getting a rifle. That makes sense. But still, the rifle and the scope are necessaries. Then I would also say that a good bipod would be a necessary. Do you agree? Well, I agree that a bipod is necessary to make sure that your system is as stable as possible, and the stability is going to create repetitiveness, and also a rear rest of some sort. Yeah, well, with a rear rest, I think we're kind of, or a rear bag, I think we're kind of moving into the realm of nice to have rather than need to have, because with a rear rest, of course, your shot's going to be more stable. Yeah, and stability is what creates repetitiveness. We want to be as stable as possible. Well, yeah, and repetitiveness is really, really, really important in shooting long range. Yeah, that's why we have all of the other gear that we have. So, what else would you say is need to have? Well, I would also say that a chronograph and a wind gauge would be necessary to have, because that is what makes tells you your ballistics. Isn't the wind gauge more of a nice to have rather than a need to have? I mean, you could always just call out your shots or see the wind in the flags that are out on the range. Well, yes and no. I mean, the wind flags on the range, if you're experienced, you can read the wind just fine. Yeah, sure. But it's also nice to know the wind so you can dial that into your app that you're using. That makes sense. So all of the need to have parts would be rifle, scope, bipod, rear bag, rear rests of some sort, and chronograph. Anything else? Well, yeah, I would say that a mat would be a need to have. It's important to be comfortable when you're shooting, and that's why I think that a mat is a need to have. I really like my mat. Well, a mat isn't that more of a nice to have than is a need to have? No, I need it. I need it. Well, you may need it. Yeah. Is it really a need to have? I mean, well, it's really nice. Need to have a mat to lie on, but it's really nice to have a mat to lie on. Yeah, exactly. It's nice to have. And then we get into things like a spotting scope. Spotting scopes are really nice to have. They are nice to have, but they also, well, you can't use a spotting scope to spot, doesn't it? It kind of requires you to have a spotter. Yes, you need to be a spotter shooter team to be able to use that spotting scope. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to get a spotting scope if you're not in a team. No, it doesn't really. You need to be, as you say, a spotter shooter team to be able to use a spotter, because when we're in prone, we're looking through our own scope, and it's not possible to look through the spotter at the same time. Yeah, and then you're going to be able to spot yourself through your scope. Yeah, exactly. The scope is where we're in the prone, and when we're at a mile, or plus a mile, the bullet takes so long to get there that we can get back, depending on how much your rifle jumps, that we can get back on target and see where about we're hitting around the target or on target. Yeah, and with the cameras, you use those to see your impacts. Well, yeah, with when we're talking about cameras, we're further out than about a mile. That's because in Denmark, where we're shooting, the range is so flat that the curvature of the earth, even though we're on the third floor shooting, we can't really see our impacts at 2 miles. So we put up cameras so that we can dial them up. We actually use FaceTime to dial them up, and then the cameras tape whatever's at the 2 mile, or shows us whatever's at the 2 mile, and then we can see the hits at around the 2 mile, or we can hear the hiss from the bullet. Yeah, and that's why we're talking caliber size, because caliber size really is very important for the range that you're shooting at. Oh yeah. If you have a too small caliber, it's not going to be able to make it. I'm just gonna get my book. Yeah, I had a couple of things that I wrote down, and yeah. I've written down here that a spotting scope, we already covered that. Yeah. A tripod, would you say that's a need to have or nice to have? Well, if you're running a team, then a tripod is a need to have, because you cannot hold that spotting scope still enough on your own. You can't just stand with it and spot anybody. You need it on a stable platform to see what's going on out on the far. So yeah, I would say a tripod, a good tripod by that, is also a necessary to do that. So it's a nice to have in ELR. No, not yet. I have a bunch of my rifles where I have a bubble level on it, and is that? I would say that's necessary. Yeah. Well, the bubble level, and the theory behind the bubble level is that if you have, it's again repetitiveness. If you have the bubble level on your system, then you're going to be able to level out your rifle, and the bullet's going to leave the muzzle the same every time. So that's the theory behind the bubble level. We were discussing a mat to lay on. What do? You mentioned to me earlier that you don't have one single shooting mat in your inventory. No, What do you do for shooting mats? Well, I don't have a shooting on the range. Well, I don't have a shooting mat as such. I use my rifle cases, and the rifle case I run is big enough to put my my 338 Lapua in there, unfolded, and actually it's also long enough for me to lie on it. I believe you designed that. Is that correct? Well, and yeah, and that is, I use that so that I don't need to lug around a bunch of extra equipment. So, yeah, and we've actually designed a bag that doubles out as a shooting mat. It's long enough for me to have my 338 Lapua in it, you do, unfolded, and it's also long enough for me to actually lay and sleep on it if that should be necessary. That's actually why we designed it that way. You sleep at the range? I guess we could take some pictures of that and maybe show them up here or up here somewhere. But anyway, that's why we designed that, was so that I can use my my gun case as a shooting mat. So what's the problem with having the cases? Well, the cases aren't really a problem as such, and they are a need to have if you're going to go flying with your rifle. Then they require you to have it in a locked case, and you can't use the bags of the mat or the shooting bags. And that is, yeah, yeah, that's true. And that brings me to the next point that I wrote down was muzzle brake. Yeah, because that, as you say, you need to shake off your mat before you put your rifle back into it. Mm-hmm. If you use it as a shooting mat, that makes a lot of sense, because otherwise you're going to get a bunch of sand and crud on your rifle after mm-hmm. you're done shooting. Yeah, and that's because of the muzzle brakes of the guys that are next to you, isn't it? All the dust and the sand getting kicked up. Well, is the muzzle brake really necessary on a rifle like these? I would say it is, and it's not just the guys next to you, it's also your own system that's going to be kicking up dust and crud. But yes, I would say that... But we could also go silencer. We could go silencer as well, but the question is repetitiveness. Again, we want something to reduce felt recoil as much as possible, so that we can get back on target and have that repetitiveness as much as possible. True. How about chassis? Well, chassis are necessary to be able to set it up for you. Is it really now? Well, I would say so, again, because of repetitiveness. But can't you do the same with a regular stock that you can with a chassis? Well, you can do a lot with a regular stock that you could also do with the chassis, yes. But you're never going to get the same adjustability into a regular stock as you do in a chassis. Well, you could also just strap a bag on the back of your stock. I mean, you could also shoot yourself in the foot with a spoon, but I choose not to do that. All right, I agree. We'll put it in the really nice to have pile. Okay. And that's because of, well, that's because, again, of the repetitivity and the stable shots that we're going to be able to take with a rifle that's tailored to my body or to your body or to anybody else's body. When you're on the line and you're shooting, you want that same cheek weld, you want that same shoulder or length of pull on the rifle, and the more you can set your rifle up to be set up to you, the better that's going to be, exactly because that you have a system that's tailored to you, and that's going to create a better chance of you being stable and can repeat the last shot you took, and also the same position. Now, coming back into the need to have, we've already been over the rifle and the scope. Mm-hmm. That really makes it a lot easier to hit stuff at distance. It does. Hearing protectors, of course, you need to have hearing protectors. Definitely. That's sucks without them.
You need to have a rifle. You need to have a scope.
Yeah.
A bipod. Is it necessary to buy the most expensive bipod you can find?
I would say yes and no. It's depending on the situation. I would say that a good bipod is also creating a more stable system, and that creates repeatability. I'm really big on repeatability. I mean, if you can repeat your shot, that's always a good thing.
So wouldn't a cheap AliExpress or Temu or whatever Chinese bullshit bipod, wouldn't that do the job just fine?
Well, yes and no. You'd have the risk of, and I know you've tried this, having a bipod that just buckles under you. So that's a risk.
That's a good idea. I should do a bipod playlist. So yeah,
you should do a bipod playlist. And therein you should have a bunch of different.
Okay. Rear bags. We have made quite a few rear bags in ELR-Precision.
Yeah.
We have our own original bags, and I use the same bag now that I did when I started out.
Yeah, I use the same one.
And we can also just have a picture of that there or somewhere.
Right?
There, I guess. And when we use these rear bags, it's also great to have those customizable. Do you agree?
Oh yeah, because there are no two shooters that have the same priority or the same need for height or for squeeze toughness or for whatever. It should be customizable. What kind of rear bag you want?
Yeah, and that's why we do rear bags also on order, so you can order them in the sizes that you want. So
not quite.
That's going to be a thing,
but it's not quite a thing yet.
We've been over chronographs and why are chronographs so important for long range?
Well, chronographs are probably one of the most important tools that you can have in your inventory, because you want to know exactly how fast your bullet's going. Because if you don't know that, you're not going to be able to calculate your ballistics, and if you can't calculate your ballistics, then your calculations for how many mils you need to go for a certain distance are going to be totally haywire. Always the best way of doing a long distance shot is to not waste a bunch of ammo trying to get there. So the calculations beforehand are really important, and that's why the speed and the chronographs are so important.
Right. You mentioned rangefinder.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you feel that that's a necessary thing to have?
Well, again, a rangefinder tells you how far you're out, and then you can calculate how many clicks you need to go there. So,
but all the targets are known. You know exactly how far the targets are away.
Well, yeah, in some cases you do. When you're in competition, yes, you know exactly how far the targets are away, but you don't always know how far they're away.
So it's not really need to have, is it?
Well, again, it depends on the situation. It's nice to know your distances.
Well, yeah, sure. If you're talking a hunting situation or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
it is a need to have a long-range hunting situation. But in competition, usually you know the targets and how far they are away.
True. And with that, you can agree on a set distance with the.
All right. So also the rifle and the scope. You also need something to set the scope into.
Mm-hmm. A good mount is really important for creating a stable system that's going to be able to do for you what you want it to do. I use big, chunky, heavy mounts for all of my scopes, and that's because I like them to be as I want them to hold on to the scope as much as possible. And when they're holding on, or depending on what kind of mount you get, you're also going to have to take into consideration what kind of cant you want in that mount. There's the solid piece mounts. You can get cant in those, so you can angle your scope to go further out.
What about the mounts that can move? The tiltable mounts.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of those because you change your head position and your cheek weld when you do move your scope up and down. They're cool that you can move them around, but I prefer the periscope style to mount in front of your scope,
yeah,
and thereby change how much cant you have, and that to me is a better way of doing it. Yeah.
So well, I guess this video doesn't have to be longer than this. So in conclusion, hearing protectors, a rifle, a scope, the caliber that can go the distance, a mount that makes sense with the cant, of the mount that makes sense, bipod, rear bag, chronograph. We were going to put the rangefinder into really nice to have instead of the.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so rangefinder is really nice to have, but not really a need to have.
Depends.
Okay, and why is wind speed so important?
Well, wind speed is important because of bullet drift and repeatability. So the best thing would be to have a weather station basically at each distance, so you can know what the wind is at that distance. Yes, it would be, but that's not really an option. So that's why you need to be able to read the wind on the flags.
So that's a different video, learning how to read the wind.
Yes, it is definitely
on flags.
Well, on the flags, because that's the easiest way to go.
All right, cool. Let's continue. So, spotting scope, and tripod.
Tripod, yes. To be a stable.
And bubble level.
Well, yes and no. I wouldn't say it's not. It's
mats.
It's nice to have. Mats are important. They're very important.
We'll agree to disagree on that. A mat is not really neat to have. It's
yes,
just really nice to have.
No, it's neat.
Muzzle brake.
Muzzle brakes are important so that you can have as stable a system as possible.
And we put then we put the chassis into the really nice to have segment as well.
Well, I would still put them in the need to have. That's just me personally, to be able to set it up to me. So,
and then the case for your ammunition, case for your rifle, all that.
Again, if flying, that's a need to have. The airlines tell you that you have to have it in those so you can lock your system in. So that's a need to have if you're going to go international.
All right. So that was a small need to have versus nice to have. I'd like to thank Igil.
Thank you.
From ELR-Precision.
You're welcome.
With helping me do this video. So that's a wrap.
Well,
remember to subscribe, remember to like, remember to share. That's what grows the channel, and that's what helps me keep going.
and also maybe if somebody has a PayPal, $1 or $2, well, that would be cool, but I don't know about that. So until next time.
Until next time.
Stay tuned and stay safe. That was weird.